This Hangout Air is live. Okay, so my name is Tate, and I've got the handle Truther Tate there. I don't know if that's visible to you. I'm the founder and owner. I've given away ownership to my partners in Moscow, but I'm the founder of Direct Info in Moscow, and that was in '97. I'm talking with Stan Grafski. He's also in Moscow. Well, he's in Moscow. I'm not. I'm in New Zealand now, but we both have done business in Moscow. We're actually on a project together right now. Is that right, Stan?
Yeah. Well, it's in the process.
It's in process. Yeah, I'd like to introduce you just in the following way. Stan is a rare guy. If you're watching this broadcast, you're meeting a rare guy, and I'll tell you in which way. Especially if you're a foreigner, and if you want to do business in Russia, or if you know someone who does, or you just want to know what it's like to do business in Russia today in these special times. But in any time, Stan's been doing this for decades. I don't know the exact year, Stan. Sorry, you can introduce yourself a little bit later, but nearly 20 years, is that right?
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years, okay. So I'm
My
right.
My first client was in late 80s.
Okay, so I'm just at 21 or 2 years, I think. Well, not anymore. I'm not there, but the company's been around since I founded 22 years. Stan, this is about you. You have experience in Russia. You have experience bringing foreigners into Russia and helping them, even when they don't know the language, or when they do know the language, but they don't know all of the aspects of Russia that helps them navigate the tricky moments, you know, the bribery, the crime, which has gone down, but that used to be a big issue when I was there in the 90s. Just navigating the legal foundation, the proper etiquette, how to meet people, what's the process, the protocols for moving through when you meet someone to the contract negotiation, to the signing, getting a decent deal, being respected on a peer basis and not you know, one higher than the other. You've helped people. You've basically held their hand from the airport back to the airport, going to production facilities, offices, forming partnerships, forming long-term relationships with sales. You've done a lot, Stan. You've done a lot, and what sets you apart from everyone else, I can tell you, it's not that, although that's quite important. It is that you speak English fantastically, and you actually care about your foreign clients. So when your foreign client comes in, they're getting your representation, and I know that because I know you quite well. You're representing their interests, and I think that's quite important. Can you possibly, I'll put you on the spot, Stan. What makes you good at that? What allowed you to become proficient at helping foreigners in Russia? Was it a natural attraction? Was there some skills that you got in your university? When did you start to really go in that direction? Maybe we can start with that aspect and then get to some of the more interesting things like your projects and so on.
Thank you for a great introduction. I hardly believe it's all about me, nevertheless. Well, I have no answer for that. Realistically, it's just started as it started in the late 80s when I was a full-time law student, and I had a first client from the UK, and I just helped to I even participated in that venture partially to bring those knowledge and skills of those guys into this country, and that was quite successful for a few months business. And later on, upon graduation, I just went to the UK to improve my English, and I spent there 6 months trying to do what I said. Hopefully I did succeed in it a little bit, and upon that it was quite a lot of industries I was working in and simultaneously working for myself, which realistically founded the, paved the grounds for those skills which these days I can make saleable. I set up in the 90s. I participated as a partner in quite a number of businesses. For example, I was the first guy who started selling Russian molasses abroad, for example. I brought, ironically, I brought an offer to one of my clients in Central Russia saying, hey, you need an international structure for international sales. You deal in sugars. Why don't I just not selling you a company, but I would like to introduce you to the bankers. And those days, I already had quite 5-7 years banking record with Barclays, NatWest, as a personal, as a business, and that was not a big deal to me. So I brought him there, and on the spot, I introduced him to one of the biggest players in molasses. And for that time, ironically, molasses was never consumed in this country; it was thrown away. And my client said, why don't you stay here in London? Set it up. And we set it up. We're buying. Initially, sugar factories didn't believe it could be a product that's good. We were buying maximum for $10 per ton. We were selling in the Novorossiysk port at least 120 per ton, sending it to New Orleans in the United States.
Great.
That was one of those commodity business I was involved, but that was 90s. That 90s like a wild years, but and a lot of opportunities been missed realistically as an entrepreneur. At the same time, over these years, I also participated in law practices. I partnered and was a partner with American law firm in Moscow. So simultaneously there were quite a list of clients I served on my own. In the 90s, it was basically initial clients or companies interested through the word of mouth, coming mainly from the UK, through my contacts, through my friends who already did something here. At the same time, I was bringing Russians outside of the country, setting up their businesses on the continent, in the United Kingdom, helping expand in the United States and that kind of stuff. And over the years, obviously I was changing even employers, worked for the television. I helped first channel, Channel 1, which is the Russian biggest channel in the world, to expand abroad further in the beginning of 2000s. And then I moved into gaming business, gambling, call it whatever it is. Then I got my MBA in the UK, and upon return, I spent a few years with PR and government relations, lobbying activities. And in the last 10 years, I think it is completely I'm on my own. So to answer your question, it's kind of a lot of factors which affected this way. I was doing those entries realistically. I started thinking about this, a particular business expertise as a market entry support, probably some 10-15 years ago. Before that, I didn't even think about it. I was just helping people. They asked me to do some certain issues, release them on the ground, find out opportunity, doing matchmaking without thinking twice. And there is quite a list of Russian players who are selling abroad the products produced here in this country. And it was, two-way traffic. But in particular, in the last 10 years, when I'm doing that as my main business, I think it's a lot of opportunities even for, let's say, my peers on the ground, for those who understand the gaps, being locals, understanding the gaps for this expertise, but also for uncapped uncovered lots of opportunities which are not yet widely known on the West for a number of reasons, including political ones, by the way, and you know that. But I'm sure there is a huge. It's it's stupid to compare it with something else, but as I perceive, Russian market is probably kind of on average considered to be kind of like a Chinese economy somewhere in the 90s, because everyone heard something about it on the West, but a little bit scared. Oh, something is wrong. They're a communist country. Or there is a Putin. Such a threatening figure. It's such a character who's got tons of weapons and blah 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 blah. And PR effect of country appearance outweighed, which is quite, in most cases, I think, it's just a black PR. I believe I can tell that as a professional PR guy for many years with global players. It's a kind of a right opportunity. Who wins the market? Always, so-called, there are pioneers, challengers, those who entered it at the beginning. Few years after, when you realize, yeah, there is an interest, there is a proof. My friend John already set up business, and look, he's doing great, but the situation changes, it's evolving. As one of those peers, or my peers in terms of market entry advice from the UK, said, this market evolving, the speed of light. What is available today can be not that available in a year time, which is just very short, realistically. And seriously, I had a number of clients who, when entered the market with my help, were the first on the ground. In other words, they literally had no competitors, which they did and still have in their countries, in the continent, United States, and I think it's one of the biggest attractions here. Not about also about the bigger margin, which is obvious, but it's also about the opportunities, which way you can go. I can talk about it for years. So you'd rather ask me. Interrupt me.
That's a great introduction, Stan. I think people are seeing that you're easy to work with and very comfortable in the atmosphere of talking about these things, introducing people, and you've done it quite a lot. Could you speak to, right now, there's a lot of people out there that are interested in Russia, but they maybe don't know how to approach it. You said things are changing at the speed of light. So what do you mean, and what industries are changing in a positive direction? And maybe if you could talk a little bit about why. The other day we talked about Crimea and how it's changing. We talked about the stability of the Russian economy and how the PPP, the purchase power parity, is actually quite a lot higher than the currency represents, being devalued against Western currencies, but still holding value relative to that internally in Russia. So Russia is actually a self-sufficient country nearly, as it was in the Soviet days nearly, or at least going in that direction. And it is depressed. It is overly depressed by many factors. If you want to buy low and sell high, look at Russia in terms of being artificially low. So I guess I'm introducing the idea that you're the expert on the ground in Russia, in contact with many different industries. You've got your views, you've got your background. Could you speak just a little bit more to what industries are attractive and why do you think they're attractive, so that other people can begin to look through your eyes? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, yeah, the economy evolves here quite quickly, realistically, and in particular in the last 2-3 years, after so-called sanctions were imposed onto this country, I believe, maybe I'm mistaken, but KGB always was a master of hidden operations, and I think Mr. Obama was one of those recruits of KGB. What his administration did at the end of the day, Russian government was unable to do in the last 87 or 90 years. And that's why.
Could you tell us a little bit more what you're talking about?
Realistically, Western sanctions at the visible side, if you like, look like a serious pressure. In reality, they generated the biggest trouble the country faced here some 3 years ago when the sanctions were imposed, is the lack or shortage of free finances, not free, but cheap finances coming through the banking system, when Russian banks, namely, buying cheap loans from the West, which were resold, obviously, on the local market. So that line was cut. So realistically, for the first year, the entire industry had to be self-sufficient, whether it wanted or not. At the same time, Russian ruble devalued twice that year. The other side of this coin, as it appeared quite soon, within a year or two, as I said, the first industries coming, answering your question, the first industries which appeared to be very much successful and marginable with quick return of investments, appeared to be, which nobody would believe in this country, as agricultural business. Russia was buying wheat, rice, and grains for over 70 years. Well, I know it's kind of pathetic in such a big country buying rye or wheat outside, but that was a real situation. As of today, it's one of the world leaders, if not number one, of exporters. That's a real situation. So the impulse received by those sanctions changed the complete economy environment inside the country. So if, let's say, a few years ago, the simplest and easiest business for international players was, I would say, reselling ready-made products, and the economy in general was so-called consumerist. These days, it's not that way anymore. Well, there is still a list of products for quick sales. That's true, but the list is not that long anymore. But most importantly, the economy is developing pretty much self-sufficiently, with identifying a lot of demand for its current status. And it's one of those interesting industries which I believe it's a huge opportunities for international businesses as supply chain or supply into the manufacturing industries. As I mentioned before, this was an interesting article. I didn't meet those guys on my own, but it's about another trend in electronics industry. The Russian producers of electronic industries, those who set up the manufacturing in China, now these days realized that production on all costs twice lower in Moscow, which is the most important region across the country, rather than in China, not to mention logistics. So quite a lot of local players moving their production to this country. Actually, Chinese were much faster than Russians. They realized the trend 2 years ago, and quite a list of medium to large state-owned companies in China already started outsourcing production in the Russian Far East 2 years ago. Russians even slower. So what I'm thinking of is there is a huge, absolutely huge. It's not even a niche. It's the entire. It's rows of industries which require supply or regular supply on a regular basis. You know, the economy is on the rise, but after the sorry destroyal of Soviet Union, which realistically affected a lot of companies being gone bankrupt or completely destroyed, the supply chain being destroyed over the years, it all generates a lot of opportunities for new entrants with new technologies to come and say from machineries, from disposables, whatever it is. Just come to the working serious, small, medium, large size companies and say, hey guys, let me tell you, we're in the same industry, we can supply to you. And as simple as that, in many cases, sorry, the supply of certain spare parts, components just missing. Ironically, a few years ago, even before this trend came out, everyone knows the name of Gazprom. It's a monster #1 gas company in the world. When the first, I'm just talking about my ex-client, a European company, engineering company, producing certain components to pipes. And they said, well, can you introduce us to Gazprom? And I was kind of arrogant to their request, thinking, well, Gazprom can do whatever they want. They can say, you know, rocket Sputniks into the space if they want. But when I moved on to the negotiation stage, I just realized even these companies with huge amount of money and research base do not necessarily have enough facilities to meet all the requirements of ever-changing market demand.
Too big and too complex. And if Gazprom is too big and too complex, and they can use suppliers that are more flexible and can ensure that the supply of certain components in one of their sectors, they have so many, I guess, like oil and gas is their big one, but there must be so many different fingers that they're involved in along the chain, and maybe some things completely unrelated. So a solution to one of them just being reliable and having the quality and the time, the delivery time work on the flow rate that they require as they demanded it. Does that make sense? Is that the sort of thing that let's say you're speaking to a Western person who wants to enter, and you're educating the Western person what sorts of things they could look out for. And you mentioned there's a supply chain, and there's industry, and there's either disposables or components going into manufacturing processes or logistics, support, anything that supports the internal production and export, or it could be import as well, consumption as well. So it's really about supply, reliable quality, on a flow, on demand, that ready, just in time sort of thing. Is that what you're going for? Is that what?
Yeah, but that not necessarily. It's not necessarily to be, you know, kind of an urgent supply. Many companies, and as I shared some info with you before, again, world players actually looking for supply of certain disposables and cannot find it on this market, and they have, I mean, they are real world players with serious budgets. They prepared to pay more than decently. It sounds a little bit stupid, you know, such a big company. As I mentioned before, it's in a metals industry with tens of thousands of full-time employees. And I thought, well, these guys can outsource it easily. They don't. And that's where definitely there is one of those niches. Plus quite a number of, if you apply approach creatively. It's not just a one way of a business life. Every time you need to, and one of those frequently asked questions is, give me a list of those industries which are profitable, and the answer is, there is no such list. Yeah, I know a few, or maybe quite a few. But
hey, you're bringing up an interesting point now, and I'd like to go into that a little bit more. Let's pretend that someone is out there that's watching this, and they're saying, okay, what actions do I need to take as an investor? So you made the discussion about someone asking for most prospective industries, and that can be a list of 10 items. That's not going to help anyone. You can get a list from the internet. That's not going to help anyone. You might even call to their front desk and try to get through the secretary. You might even get through. What will that do? That's not going to do anything. Well, it may, depends on your technique, but you offer something else. You offer something where you're taking into account the strengths of the foreign company. Go into what sort of things you offer. Maybe you can give an example. So let's say someone is in Italy or Germany or Korea or US, and maybe they're with manufacturing. Maybe they're trying to sell some food products into. Maybe they're looking for first level entrant, sell to Russia as components to manufacturing. Second level entrant, start manufacturing with a partner. Third level is either buy it out or franchise it, or I don't know. Just sort of, if you could walk people through a little bit on a way. I know it's different for each person, but it certainly doesn't begin with a list of attractive industries. There must be something else, because anyone can look this up. It's not an edge. It's not enough of an edge. What is your edge that you can provide? But start from the point of view of what should people do?
Well, the common sense, everything is grounded or based on common sense in the first place. If you want to sell, first find your buyers, identify your targets. That's obvious, and that's everybody understands. But the difference, which I believe I bring to my clients over my peers, or quite a majority of them, is that no matter how little bit PR like it might look like, but I bring a personal approach, and that personal approach means that it's not just the identification of potential targets or companies that might be interested on this market. My approach is a bit different. I understand, and we actually use a few so-called products, market entry products. First one is quick start. When I'm able, or my team is able, to identify initial targets quite fast together with the client, and we use it as a litmus for when I'm approaching potential targets, obviously with Russian language, promotional materials, but the key here is a face-to-face meeting with the decision maker, just to identify a real, I emphasize, a real interest. Because some, quite educated business owners and executives, they might play interested voice or polite voice for quite a long time, and you waste your time. It's one story in particular that's typical for Moscow, where every second homeless cat speaks English these days. And the market entrant sometimes mistakenly believe that, oh, there is a communication. Yeah, well, someone has already said, yeah, they might be interested. They might be. It's like in every market. Everyone's never say no immediately. But the question is, you never know what's the real rationale behind the yes or no, but it's not even a yes. You need to identify what.
Into a board, you could walk someone into a general manager's office or a decision maker's office, whatever the case might be, and help that person identify a real need. And you can line up a string of those sorts of meetings based on a business trip, and with people that could potentially serve a research would become preliminary to that. So it's sort of like understand the part. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I know a little bit about how you operate. I'm also taking some of the words that you said just now. Identify the buyer, which means understand the client, and you do some research to set things up, both from the information point of view and the meeting point of view. You walk them into these negotiation. Well, it may be hopefully ends up to be a negotiation process, and that's the real added value that you provide.
Yeah, but most importantly, and I think where the value is as revealing either interest or lack of interest. And when there is many, that's another frequently asked question when someone either met at the fair, trade fair, or somewhere else, or communicated with me. No, Russian market is not interested, because we send our pitches and we received either complete ignorance or complete silence on the other side, on one hand, or on the Russian side, which means they're not interested, or they said they're not interested. I mean, literally said there is no interest. So this market is definitely not for us. I said, well, open the headlines in English-speaking, portals about Russian economy and check if there is an interest or not. Just what newspapers talk about your certain products. Or compare the open retailers, if you deal, let's say, with FMCG goods, and see the prices. That will give you an idea. If there is a difference, let's say, at least twice, comparing with your wholesale price, if there is twice difference, then definitely there is a gap. Normally, it's about that. And in most cases, more often than not, the answer, when you start digging into discussion, you realize those guys received either negative response or complete ignorance or whatever, just silence on the other side of the telephone line. It's just not because of lack of the interest to their particular products, but it's rather subjective issues. Let's say the goal in a procurement department, if there is one, which is rare, to middle and small size companies in this country, are just lazy to, for example, to develop this new contract, or they bombarded, which is true these days. Many companies bombarded with international offers coming, particularly from the agent. They're already fed up of them. They don't want to see, useless pitches which lead nowhere. So realistically, it's one of those stories. Very typical, by the way. The second, many companies are run by owners, sole executives, where nobody except of those selected people make a decision. And so realistically, unless you get into those decision making, you cannot receive the answer. And but more interesting, and I think that's where the real gap is. It's identifying. That's what we call real market response. It's not just talking, are you interested in this pen or not? Now, end of story. No, but my question is, first, why? Whether that's price or quality or whatever it is. And second, but what do you like? What do you want? Do you need stationery for your business? Oh, we already supply it, but maybe we can help you with something else or something like that. Oh, we can offer you a better terms. So you need to get engaged to engage the client. And that's where 90%, approximately 90% of sales are coming from, because people start communicating with you, reveal it's like, I think one day I told you about that option. Not option, the case I had with the European dairy manufacturer. What they were thinking before the sanctions, they were thinking about direct deliveries of the cheeses, but the situation changed. Russia closed the door as a countermeasure, and pretty soon after that, the prices, ruble was devalued, so they're completely incompetitive, and they did have, which I proposed right at the beginning, Plan A is simple, just sell ready-made product. Plan B, consider consider bringing your technology to the existing Russian manufacturer with existing client base and set up into a venture. And actually, that's what worked out with those guys. Realistically, they didn't even think they were about to put big cross on this country. But they said, "Oh, hold on, let me finish my work. Let me finish it." And then that company, which is a dairy, quite medium-sized company, well, or big size for their region, it's not in Moscow located, realized they can upgrade the entire manufacturing using those European technologies, and in exchange for sharing profits, plus allowing those new shareholders to participate in the profits using their client chain, client base, which is a few regions across the country. That was a solution, and my clients are still happy.
Great. Every problem has an opportunity. So when the Russian market was changed through sanctions and the devaluation of the currency, which affected many aspects of the market, that presented an opportunity. So whereas previous plans of many companies, not just your partners there, the cheese manufacturers, but that changed the dynamics, and now things have changed so much. By the way, congratulations on seeing that opportunity, Stan, and also for helping your clients understand it, and even more that they're successful to, are they producing in Russia at the moment?
Yeah. Well, the production, they brought a few production lines, which realistically by now, as far as I know, completely replaced the old Russian-made ones, produced somewhere in the 60s or 70s. These days they increase the, I think they increase the quality, but also the range of those products, plus the margin. Obviously, the margin is.
So look at all the, help me count all of the different things that you can take advantage of in Russia today. So the currency's low, so that means you can buy cheaper with Western currency. The education is very high, so transferring technology is not a problem. The government is very stable, which people don't understand that. That may be something that we can get into as well, because people believe the country is unstable. Many. I'm talking about the average Western person. They believe that Russia as a country is an unstable country. They believe that everything that comes out of the media so often and so with such negative headlines, there must be some truth in it if they repeat over and over again such bad news. But the fact is, as you and I know, Russia is much safer now to do business in since the Soviet days. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my feeling is that even about Putin, my feeling about him, he's in the first place, he's a very smart long-term strategist, and he doesn't want, he's got his own investments. He doesn't want to lose them. Yeah. And I think obviously indirectly, and he's interested then in a stability. That's actually his triple mantra he was articulating over the last 17 years. He's at power. Stability, stability, and stability. Once you make it stable, the rest is just a matter of time. That's simple as that. And in reality, look at the number of areas of so-called accelerated developments which are growing across the country, which means even taking into account in the first place quite a moderate tax regime for businesses, lower, by the way, pretty much lower than in the continent, on average, in particular related with the small businesses. So every time when someone asks me how much you pay and nobody believes me that's true, I'm a small business owner earning under 1 million euros a year, and I'm paying 6% on sales. End of story, no VAT.
Oh, that's great. And people do the same sort of. Is it 13% income tax?
No. That's end of story.
Oh,
Because those who pay 13% are supposed to be either on a payroll. I'm on my own. I'm a sole trader as a business owner. And but again, even if I'm not a business owner, a shareholder of a small business, of limited companies, if the sales under 1 million euros a year, it's so-called simplified tax scheme. And you can either choose for 6% sales, which is just loved by tax people. They don't need to screw you every time to find out what you're hidden or not. They check your accounts and see, oh, that's how much you owe us. What is that, 6%? Nothing. Or 15% on difference in sales and costs. But again, even in taking the average business, which are with sales of over that, and that applies to any business player, including international players. It doesn't matter whether you're Russian or you're not Russian. Once you set up local representation, local business or registered, once you're a taxpayer, you're equal with the others. Plus, you can get extra incentives as international investor, in particular in those areas like accelerated areas, free trade zones, and so forth. So coming back to those stories about unstable and corruption, well, my opinion, I do remember 90s. You do remember 90s.
Yeah.
You do remember how unsafe it was even on the Tverskaya Street in center of Moscow, where your office is.
Yeah.
Next to Kremlin. But these days, it's everything is changed completely, including when people, the corruption, someone. And every time when someone tells me, in particular those who never been to Russia, I say, well, what exactly you mean by corruption? But just tell me. Because one story is corruption, the word. The other story, as a lawyer, I understand what corruption is.
Corruption from, I think, most people's experience who go to Russia, it's the street corruption where you get pulled over by the police office, by the militia, and they just take a bribe for whatever reason. And this is quite a usual thing when I was there. But the other more scary one is when you get approached by someone who owns a territory, and the mafia, they have their connections, and but they've been pushed out, and I've had absolutely no trouble ever. In fact, the only trouble I've had in Russia, which was quite serious, was from a former American FBI agent who went rogue and tried to take over my business. I don't think I told you that story, Stan, but it's one I'd prefer to forget. But it was a long time ago. I've had no problems, and I've met with many mafia people. I just didn't talk about my business, and I was not a cash business, so back in those days they didn't understand it. Something was happening in the offshore, bank transfer. That in those days they weren't so sophisticated. But then, in my crude opinion, which is not insider knowledge, but as I saw, the street crime went from the corruption went from the street into the businesses, into the banks, into the politics, and then got collapsed by Putin. So that's how I see it. That's generally how I see it. Of course, there's still going to be corruption. There's still going to be, insider trading is corruption. It's very soft. It always happens. Everyone who has a chance to learn a little bit, to get an edge, they're going to do that. But I would say the corruption that we see in the States, where just recently, there's a murdered man who sent information about the Democratic Party. He apparently was murdered, and his murder was apparently to cover up the fact that he was the one that sent information, and not some Russian hacker that sent information. No one's talked about whether these emails are true or false. They know it's false. No one's talked about whether crimes were committed on the American side. They know crimes have been committed. The question is, did Russia hack those emails and give them out to the press? Well, as it turns out, That's also not true. And the guy was murdered. I mean, that's corruption. Come on. If we're going to talk corruption, we talk United States, who goes to 14 countries, bombs them, strips the resources out, and the vice president who's involved in making the decision, which was, by the way, falsified, to invade Iraq in 2003 with shock and awe, when his company made $40 billion in 2 years on that decision and wasn't investigated. Imagine if Putin did anything related to those two stories. If he just does nothing, he gets attacked. Imagine if he actually did something that was considered on that level. So, you know,
Well,
my vision of corruption, sorry, I went off a little bit, but that's my definition of corruption, and I compare it to the real corruption that's happening. And when you see deaths in the millions of people, and you see money involved in the trillions of dollars, and you see corruption with falsifying reasons to make it war on that level, ladies and gentlemen, come on. Which is the corrupt country? How do we base logically and what principles do we use to evaluate what measuring stick for corruption is there? If that's not corruption, I would rather pay a bribe on the street for a cop. By the way, that doesn't even exist in Russia now, does it? You don't even pay bribes on the street so much, maybe. It probably exists.
I haven't been asked for a bribe for 15 years by now.
Okay.
And the bribe you mentioned actually was about bribe by so-called, you know, private policemen. Private at the very basic level, and most of those guys who hide by police, in particular in Moscow, because of such a demand for them, police often hires those guys straight right after the army. Most of those guys, in particular, grown somewhere outside of big cities, they hardly, right? No, they do right, but to them, they consider that, well, it's an opportunity without understanding that this opportunity can turn into 10 years behind the bars for taking this small bribe of 1,000 rubles, which is $15. And most, yeah, it is in this form, it still exists, but normally against illegal workers from Asian countries.
Yeah.
That's
Do you have a
propiska registration, that kind of stuff, and related rather with migration office, not immigration office. Yeah, there is quite a long issues, but again, it is nothing to do with international businesses.
So when someone comes to, let's walk through it. Let's say there must.
Hello? I lost
investing in Russia, and some of them will want to visit. Let's walk through a couple of scenarios. Let's say scenario number one, Stan, I have something to offer. I want to push it into Russia. Tell me what the market is. Introduce me to the top guys. Prepare that research for me first, because I want to get really in-depth understanding to the opportunity before I buy a ticket, before I spend the money and organize my trip. I want to know what the opportunity is. I'm going to give you, so what sort of a contract do you make? I know you have to speak generally. You can't put a price on such a general question as that, but maybe you can give some people some idea. I know you're quite, you got a lot of added value. Step one is probably setting things up. Step two is probably implementing. Can you make it somehow broken down into simple steps so that people can understand let's say I'm a guy who wants to enter the Russian market, and I've got a general question. Let's say I have a bunch of products, Stan. I'd like to bring them into Russia. What can you do to me before we buy the plane ticket? What can you do for me, and how much will it cost?
Well, first, thanks for the question. It's really interesting. Let's talk over Skype, maybe even for a few times before that. And initially, I'm typical Russian, and I eye contact. I want to see. Actually, in the last few months, I rejected a few leads who rejected speaking with me over Skype for a number of reasons. I said, well, sorry, guys, know your client's policy in this country is in place, at least with me. I don't want to deal with ghosts. And eye contact is the first what makes me feel confident, honestly. And because I will introduce many of those to the contacts I established over the many of my careers. I don't want to
Right,
find
you've got
myself.
a reputation to uphold, and this is part of your personal approach. You want to feel representing. You want to represent honestly to both sides, and it begins with understanding both sides. The client you go to is not going to be hiding, so the client you're bringing to the buyer or to the Russian side should also not be hiding. So everyone who's watching this, be ready to share who you are with Stan in order for him to best represent you. Does that make sense? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first prerequisite, if you like. And once I identify the interest areas, well, right in the first or second discussion, I can just suggest what I think from my experience, where I can be 100% mistaken, because I cannot know everything in this world, but I can suggest you what I think about your next steps. But in general, it's very simple. First, we do market research. There are two ways. One is in-depth desktop research with a thorough, in-depth information gathering, which your company does, and I recommend it all the time. And based on that, we move forward. Or there is a so-called quick program, where your potential targets could be easily identified even without special market screening or using just an internet, where then, let's say your potential targets 100 companies, for example, and together with the client we identify, let's make so-called a litmus sample of 10 to 20 in different regions, not located in Moscow only, because regions differ one from another sometimes dramatically because of logistic costs, because of local prices, because of the, by the way, attitude of governors. You know, governor in Kaluga, which gathered most of the car assembling companies from the West in one region, is one story, and you know, so pro-communist, yeah, there are some pro-communist governors somewhere in Siberia, it's another story. But you need to identify which way is the best for you. And this way, within 3 months, I'll make sure that all those litmus group targets are approached, ideally personally, with decision makers, screened, and based on the answers, we will already have the feedback. Realistically, within 3 months, well, half of my clients secure the first sale. Not necessarily making sales, but securing sales, signing.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
And but most importantly, as I said, in many cases, it's individual approach. You know, every entry is individual. It's a new animal, if you like. Well, the algorithm is the same more or less, but once you meet the target, once you communicate with them, you identify their needs, and in many cases, based on the information we receive, client change its mind, say, oh, hold on, I can propose something, or updated products of this one. Like I have a client these days which I introduced to the market. They came here in a group of 3, CEO, the owner, and the COO. They met targets, and they have great products in their part of the world. It's related with the supply chain, but based on those meetings, they finally identify how they can slightly improve their components for those industrial manufacturers, just to meet some, not just even a safety requirements, but the expectation of the market for the next 20 years. And now it's just taking them this time to comply with the formalities, and they already agreed and handshaked. So that's it. But they wouldn't be able unless those companies or their targets would be first initially approached by me, and initial answer was, most cases, more often than not, no, we're not interested, oh, just complete ignorance or silence and that kind of stuff. In many cases, I just pick up the phone, find someone close to me in that region. Do you know those? Yeah. Give him a call and tell him I will call him. It sounds like very old-fashioned, but it works in many cases.
Yeah, I found Russian was working with people that you know was so much easier to have that meeting first, because I guess there's historical reasons for that. Just people, they talk about Russia's, everyone sort of has this picture of Russia being, this cold on the outside and then very warm on the inside. I found that absolutely true. The refrigerator is open, the bottles are shared openly and freely, and just everything in the house you're treated nearly like a son from the first moment. But outside on the street, if you didn't meet this person, even asking for directions can get a very cold response. And there may be some historical reasons for that, but I guess I'm digressing a little bit. Let's go into Stan, you've painted a very good picture of the Russian market and Russian opportunities. I know there's more details because we've talked before. There's regions, there's industrial sectors, there's ways of entering, that we talked about hotels last time in Crimea, the opportunity there. By the way, you want to contrast two economic zones like night and day. Look at the Russian Crimea zone, which used to be Ukraine, and look at the area which is also lived in by many Russians, but it's not a Russian territory. It is run by the US puppet government in Ukraine, which was a post-coup government installed by Victoria Nuland from the US State Department, handpicked by her after the George Soros-sponsored coup in that country. And eastern Donbass, eastern Ukraine, where Donbass and Lugansk are, is being bombed almost daily for 3+ years. Thousands of civilians are, sorry to bring this up, but I just have to show, Russia's being painted as a bad guy country. But if you look at how Russia manages, is full of Russians, used to be Ukraine, and look at how the United States is managing eastern Ukraine through their puppet governments. Bombs every day falling onto civilians' head, not published in the Western news, but it is published, and the victims' comments are continuously streaming, as are the pictures, as are the stories. In alternative English press, you can find many different websites and you can find Americans there on the front lines, both reporting and fighting, by the way. So this is not just something I'm making up. It's actual, factual truth. There are a lot of opportunities in Russia. And I think you painted that picture very well, Stan. And I think you also painted the picture very well of what you can do to help someone and how someone might approach you in the best way. So that's all been done really well. You gave an example last time about some people, I forget from which country. You never talk about the company that you serve, and that's fine. I respect that. I think it was a southern country. You said that they wanted you to be in their hotel room, so they paid for your room, and they didn't want you to leave from the airport all the way through to the airport. So they were enjoying their leisure time with you. They were going to the business meetings with you. You would answer the door if someone was there just for room. Is that how do you offer those kind of services as well? The full.
Well, they just asked me for accompany them 24 hours a day and staying with the same hotel, obviously paying for my room, and costs. But it was their first time trip into this country, and they realistically they were experienced guys in international expansion into the other countries, and they knew or expected the value of local being next to them. Even all those three spoke English quite decently, so they wouldn't be lost. In particular in Moscow, as I said, it's an English-speaking city, pretty much. But they wanted to get maximal out of their time in this country, and that actually, I think, gave them an extra feeling, just understanding, all right, so what is the waitress is talking about, what they mean. They ask me a lot of questions, and I explain them, even some Russian expressions, which not necessarily easy to translate into direct English, but they got the feeling, and realistically, those guys were very much happy, I hope, because they used, I mean, in positive term, as a kind of retranslate and understanding what the nuances about language during the discussion, during negotiations. What do you think? Maybe we're not gonna got into details. It's just to save their and our time, and that's really valuable. Instead of writing countless of emails, making presentations. When you answer the door is closed, don't knock it. Or no, there is opportunity, but you need to ask an extra word, but you need to understand the context of discussion.
So these guys were quite experienced in going to other countries, and they appreciated the value of having a local representative at their side especially during negotiations, but they decided with you the whole time. So they're very experienced. Is that right?
Yeah, so quite experienced. I know they're present in at least over 10, 15 countries.
Yeah,
maybe more. They supply to world leaders. They call the company. I cannot name them, but their clients include such names like Bosch, for example, and they're called the best suppliers in the world, which means the company is serious.
Yeah, so they know what they're doing. On the other side, Stan, as a matter of a bit of humor, could you explain your experience in some trade shows where you meet with people who think that they have engaged the Russian market, but actually nobody in Russia has any chance to meet with the behavior of the kind you described? The emails, the letterhead, the flyers, and the traffic that moves through these exposition centers. Exposition centers on their own is basically useless. Is that a correct statement, or is it sometimes useful? Or how would you position if someone's relying overly much on an expo? What advice can you give to them, or what is your experience of the expo in terms of effectiveness?
Well, every trade show is supposed to be treated or used with quite a long stage of preparations, if you like. If you want just to go, like as I heard sometimes, oh, let's go to Russia. As one of my peers in the UK, and it's in a video on my website, you can see. It's, look, being Russian like being pregnant. Either you're pregnant or you're not. You cannot be halfly pregnant. You have to say, you cannot just, let's go to Moscow, let's check out the business out. No, you have to be devoted. Or just don't waste your time. It saves your time and money in the first place. And the same with the trade show. And yeah, I understand you're talking about, there was a very interesting, exemplifying, striking sample a few years ago when I was at International Expo with steel, I think. And there were few rooms. One of those, or two rooms of them, were extremely full with the Russian major players in that industry. It's completely crowded. Sometimes you can hardly move in between the people to reach the certain stand you want to deal with. And there was ironically, I have nothing against Chinese, but that was very interesting. Next room was completely rented by Chinese metal tool manufacturers, metal cutting tools, machineries, blah 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 blah. And that was just ironically, I thought it's not related with that fair. Just it's completely two different stories, two cup of teas. And I saw, well, the same sign. Oh, the same Metal Expo. Oh, interesting. And I started asking, hi guys, what are you doing? And some of those had the Russian translators, some of those had English translators, blah, blah, blah. And I approached one of those who behaved quite strangely. I said, well, here is my business card, what are you interested in, blah, blah, blah. That's quite typical, you know, trying to start the discussion. He said, well, oh, you're a consultant. I don't deal with consultants. I said, well, no problem. It's a free world. It's a free country. Oh, by the way, what do you do? I said, well, I help people like you to enter this market. Oh, I know this market. Well, if you know, of course, you know. You bought a ticket. You leased the stand. I understand that there is an interest for you. You know, it's very difficult with Russians to deal with. Even if I know that there is a need for my products. I said, what do you mean? Well, there is look at my products, and it's machinery, something like that. And I know that there is Sever Style, which is one of the world leaders in steel manufacturing. Next room. You know how many pitches I sent to them, even in Russian language? I said, no. I've been bombarding them in 5 years. I said, well, did you try just to cross the border with that room and approach the procurement guys? That's exactly what I do. You need someone to introduce to them. Oh, they already saw my, I'm sure they saw my pitches or saw my presentation. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they just thrown it away in a bin. Or maybe never even checked it, because, you know, Sever Style is like BMW in German car industry. You know how many applicants they meet every day? You need a personal approach. I said, well, how much time you spent on your trip? And I can guess, you know, take into account that it's a long flight, hotel room, your stand here. I can imagine how much it costs. You spend at least 10 grand on it altogether, maybe more. For 10 grand, I will show you for 3 months, but they guarantee you that you will get very, very individual reply. I call it market response to your particular products. If
wow.
It's the interested or not. And
that is incredible.
that guy, we exchanged the cards, but he never replied even to my reminder emails. I stopped obviously disturbing him. I sent him one reminder and never got back to him, because I think it's a stubborn approach not to follow the way which is so obvious. He believes he knows how to deal in this country better than me. He spent 5 years flying here every year, as he said, standing there, talking to his compatriots and probably pretty Russian girl passing through, and that's it. No, maybe he likes it.
3 months of work, research, introductions, $10,000. That is a really great deal, Stan. That's incredible. I mean, forming relationships now in Russia is so important for so many people. Just think about the amount of the risks in the world. If you want to go to a low risk, buy low, sell high place, it's Russia. And if you want to meet someone who can actually introduce you to decision makers, buyers, partners, potential partners in Russia, and represent your interests, it is you, Stan. Everyone, you should give Stan a call if you're interested in pursuing this further. Stan, you'll talk to them at no cost on Skype. I just need to say that. I know you will, but
absolutely.
Yeah. So how do people reach you, Stan? If someone is interested in contacting you, I know you won't force them to call you on the first moment. Maybe you can give out email and Skype contacts and your website, things like that. Anything I'll flash something up, or we'll figure out a way to flash something up on the screen as well. But you want to spell it out then?
Well, my website, which has all the contacts, is the same as my surname, Grafski. I'll spell it for you. Gulfstream, Romeo, Alpha, Foxtrot, Sierra, Kilo, India.com. Grafski. Grafski.com. And all the contact details, including mobiles, all there. Plus, everyone is very much welcome to join my LinkedIn group, which is called Market Entry and Business in Russia. I have it for over 2 years. I struggle to keep it updated quite regularly, but sometimes it's only twice a week these days, because being quite busy, and I keep maybe too strict rules. I don't allow any other topics to be touched or discussed except of this main problem. If it's not related with Russian market, I immediately erase those discussions. No question is asked, or anything unrelated, because it's a platform, or at least a small room, for those who topically interested in the market entry or business in Russia. And we're very much open. We have a long list of members who also expatriates, and one of those advices I always share with my leads, if there is a way for you to identify acting businessmen or your compatriot in that country, ask them for advice, ask them what they feel about it, not me. And that's a platform, is this group, Market Entry Business Russia, where you can easily find your compatriots or expatriates or acting business in your particular niche. And you talk to them directly, and you'll get a feedback immediately. I'll be happy to help if I'm asked for.
If someone has some, let's end on a soft note then, Stan. I think everyone understands how to find you. Grafski.com.
Mm-hmm.
And all there is your information as well. You have a LinkedIn page that people can communicate with you more regularly, and it's only business oriented, so that keeps the focus, and it's managed by you. Stan, if someone, what can someone expect if you hold their hand, so to speak, and you walk them through, and they want to have a bit of fun? So some cultural experiences. Have you done that before? Have you shown people? Maybe you haven't. Maybe just. I mean, what's the usual thing? I mean, there's restaurants. There's the show. I mean, there's all sorts of classical things to see. You probably can't go to everyone that you have. Everyone that comes through you. You probably can't go each time to see the ballet again. But, I guess that's the sort of thing that people can expect in a package when they go to Russia. They will have a business experience, they'll have a cultural experience, they'll have a restaurant experience, and you'll be able to put them in touch with those two, I guess, as any Muscovite would be able to do. Is that part of your program?
Well, if they want, no problem. Whatever they ask can be included. I'm working on a time base with my clients, and this monthly hours is actually based on my experience on average. So if they want to increase it, well, we'll increase if you want. But basically, that's no problem. We can do whatever they want. But business is first, obviously.
Yeah, at least you can give advice to those places as well. And
Oh, yeah.
if there's a
Last time I'm sure you know what night flight is.
oh yeah, I know Night Flight. Let's not talk about it.
Yeah,
It was a place that people refute. Everyone knew about it. It was actually one of the more popular places, published in the press. They made a lot of money from the higher level expats. By no means was it the only place. Is it still going? Is it still running?
It's still running, but you can imagine I didn't check it recently, and my clients who wanted to knock the door, fortunately for us, for that day, that night, it was closed. But my previous experience with time and money waste there made me reluctant to enter the door. Well, it's a great place.
Yeah, that's foreigners just want to see things that don't exist or don't exist in the same way in their country. So some of that can be understood. I was never a fan of Night Flight, but I think it was run by some Swedes before. Did the Swedes still own it? Yeah.
I don't know who owns it these days.
Okay.
It used to be.
Stan, thank you so much for a well-rounded interview. This is longer than what most people on my group listen to, but I'll cut it up a little bit and throw a teaser out there and then link to this page. Stan, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to work with you and to talk with you. It's very interesting, and you're a very valuable asset. People need to understand how valuable an asset you are. I've been in Russia for so long, and I've never met such a valuable asset as you until I got out. I wish I knew you when I was there in 2007 and before. But I'm glad we're doing business long distance, and we're doing business also very close in our mutual offices together as well in Moscow, which is great. And some of our clients are now shared, I guess. So that's fantastic. You operate on the side of actually making business happen. And as people may know from previous discussions, my company Direct Info does exclusively desk research with a wide variety of sources and methods and expert interviews that go along with it. But we do not make decisions. We do not help to make decisions. We help to understand the data itself, and that's pretty much it. Everyone should make their own decision from our side. But you're the guy who actually walks people through and holds their hand. So I think our business marriage, if you like to call it, is perfect and nearly seamless. It just zips together really perfectly. So it's a pleasure to work with you, Stan. It's a pleasure to interview you. I want people to understand that you're out there and test it out. The easiest way to test it is, number one, get in contact with him. Number two, if you know someone or if you want to know someone who knows Stan, ask around. I'm someone. There's also plenty of other people. You can find them yourself. The best way to get intel on someone or something or some market, ask someone who, you collect the information from third parties. And you suggested to do that. So that's the first indicator right there that he's genuine. Someone who suggests to collect information on him from third parties, that's a genuine person in my book. First indicator passed in flying colors, Stan. So I won't waste any more of your time. Do you have more, any comments?
Not really. Thank you very much indeed for our today's chat. I really appreciate it. I'm definitely very much enjoyed it, and would be very much happy to continue our talk shows.
Let's do this every Sunday. And I like what you said on one of our previous meetings, and what you said at this one as well. Joking around that these sanctions have actually worked for Russia, and Obama might have been a KGB implant to help Russia grow, because when the pressure's on, historically, Russia always performs. If you want the best out of Russia, put the pressure on. I guess the thing which investors can come away from there is the pressure's already on, and Russia's already performing, but they're still undervalued in so many different ways, and they're an opportunity. Stan can walk you through it. He's the only guy I know who can do it on the who can and will. There's two different things there. who can do it, and he will do it in a genuine way. Thanks, Dan. That's all
Thank you,
that I have.
Tate. Yeah. See you soon then.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.